The sound of leaves crunching echo through the dark forest with every step I take. I've been wandering lost and alone for hours, and night will soon fall. Suddenly, I spot a cabin through the dense trees. It looks like it's abandoned, but I can see some smoke coming out of the chimney. I desperately need shelter for the night. I don't want to be left out in the open at the mercy of the wolves. I decided to approach the door, and I could hear the sound of my racing heartbeat as I got closer. I knocked but couldn't hear anything. Suddenly, I hear heavy footsteps closer and closer, and bang! The door starts to open. An old, seemingly blind woman stands in front of me. Before I'm able to say a word, she invites me in, and her words send shivers down my spine.
You've arrived just in time. Now, I can prepare the rest of the ingredients.
Hello everybody and welcome back. I am Kronos and this is Past Today. Join me as we explore everything about witches. It's very likely that if you ask any child in the Western Hemisphere to draw a witch, the resulting image will be quite distinguishable. You'll most likely encounter a drawing of an ugly witch with a long nose and a big pointy hat flying on a broom, or preparing a potion in a large cauldron. Where does this image come from? Today we're going to answer this and many other questions surrounding the history of witches, so be sure to stay until the end. The word witch has a long history. The term witch was already being used in the Middle Ages to define women who supposedly practiced magic or sorcery, and who were persecuted and condemned by the Inquisition. The origin of the word witch comes from the Old English word witche, referring to a powerful female magician or sorceress who was able to perform supernatural acts, but also Wicca, which referred to a male practitioner of magic or witchcraft. The verb Wiccan meant to practice witchcraft and was often associated with the use of spells and charms. Throughout history, the word witch has had many different connotations and has been used in various forms in different cultures and societies. According to the Bible, the ancestors of these creatures were featured in the haunting story of King Saul, who sought God's help, and when didn't get an answer, he sought the help of the infamous Witch of Endor. Furthermore, in the mythology of classical antiquity, they were known as striges or strixes, which were winged horrors with the appearance of harpies or owls, and that fed on human flesh and blood. In Greek mythology, they also had their own sorceresses, Circe and Medea, who possessed the power to transform their enemies into pigs. In fact, the ancient world laid the foundations for a host of rhetorical figures that eventually became associated with witches. However, it was during the Renaissance period that our modern perception of witches took on its current form. And there was one man in particular, the painter and engraver Albrecht Dürer, who played a pivotal role in defining how we imagine witches today. Dürer left a lasting mark on the image of witches with two chilling engravings. The Four Witches in 1497 depicts a seductive and agile young witch who had the ability to charm men. On the other hand, Witch Riding a Goat Backwards, circa 1500, portrays an old and abominable witch, creating a haunting image that established a stereotype of witches' appearance in popular culture. The engraving of the witch riding a goat backwards is one of the most iconic images in the history of witches. This terrifying portrayal of an old woman with sagging breasts and messy hair riding a goat with sinister horns has become the embodiment of the wicked witch that still haunts us in our current culture. In the days of the Renaissance, artists drew inspiration from the eerie figure of Invidia, envy, as depicted by Mantegna, the sickly woman who had snakes instead of hair and feasted on babies consumed by her envy of other women. This spine-chilling image of the witch spread like wildfire during the golden age of witchcraft in the 16th and 17th centuries, a time when witch trials shook Europe to its core. These artists took advantage of the invention of the printing press to quickly spread images of brutal and misogynistic witches far and wide. By the 18th century, witches were no longer considered a threat, but artists like Goya still employed them as a metaphor to expose the evils of society, as seen in his collection of prints titled Los Caprichos. Although Goya did not believe in the literal existence of witches, his graphic work remains one of the most impactful representations of the subject. Take, for instance, his print number 68 of the famed Los Caprichos series, which depicts a pair of witches engaged in a curious lesson. An old and withered witch teaching a young and attractive one how to fly on a broomstick. The image uses the verb fly as a peculiar euphemism to refer to an orgasm. In response to the vision of witches, the Catholic Church came up with the Malleus Maleficarum, from the Latin, the Hammer of Witches. This was a treatise written by two Dominican monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, in the 15th century. It was designed to be a manual for identifying, interrogating, and the trial of witches, and became one of the most influential texts of its time in the belief of witchcraft. This book claimed that witchcraft was a heinous crime and a grave sin, and that women were particularly susceptible to the devil's temptation to become witches. The treatise also provided techniques for uncovering and punishing witches, such as the use of torture and dreadful burnings at the stake. This book had a tremendous impact on the Inquisition and on the relentless persecution of witches throughout Europe for centuries. It describes in detail many methods for identifying witches, such as inspecting the body for marks or signs, subjecting the accused to physical trials to determine their guilt, and extracting confessions through unspeakable horrors of torture. The tests employed were often painful and inhumane, including the infamous water test that involved plunging the suspect into water to see if they would float like a witch or sink like an innocent. According to the Malleus Maleficarum, witches obtained their powers through a pact with the devil. They were deemed responsible for any misfortune that befell their community, from the death of an animal to hailstorms or even the plague. This nefarious work was very influential during the age of witch hunts, instilling fear and paranoia among the population. Its ideas and practices had a long-lasting impact on society. However, it should be noted that the book was deeply cruel and is currently criticized for its lack of evidence in its trials and injustice in the accusation of so many people. That's all for today, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video on origins and history of witches. This is just part 1, and if we get a good response from you, we'll record the second part too. The reason is that there's a ton of interesting information to share on this topic. Until next time, this is Kronos, signing off.